Hey guys, it's your pal Victor here from Cult Classics and Cult Following, and I'm doing a review this week of Dark Side of the Ring. This really great, awesome, really interesting wrestling weekly wrestling documentary show that's on Vice. And I've been watching this show since it started, and I keep meaning to kind of work in a rotation to start covering it on the channel because it falls into a lot of things I like. I love documentaries. I'm a big fan of pro wrestling, so it all kind of comes together. This week's episode, I kind of meant to start covering it when the season started, or last week. They also did a really great episode about death matches. But this week got me kind of off my ass to start covering it, and I wanted to talk about this whole episode is about it's called Collision in Korea, and it's about a 1993 event in Pyongyang, North Korea. It was called the North Korean Peace Festival, or the Pyongyang Peace Festival. It had a lot to do with New Japan Pro Wrestling and World Championship Wrestling coming together under the auspices of Antonio Inoki, who was a member of the Diet, which is like the Japanese parliament. Japan kind of has the same kind of deal as England, where there's, a lawmaking body, the Diet, which is like, senators, and then there's a prime minister, and then there's, the royal family, which is kind of like ceremonial only. But Antonio Inoki is a famous pro wrestler. He was one of the big three the guys like Giant Baba Antonio Inoki, who all learned at the feet of Rikidozan, who's like the god of pro wrestling in Japan. He introduced professional wrestling in Japan in the 1950s after World War II. He wrestled with like Frank Gotch, who helped, they wrestled a lot and helped kind of put over, the Japanese from being kind of this broken people to get behind Rikidozan, who's kind of like this national Japanese hero, although as this episode points out, he was actually North Korean. Anyway, Antonio Inoki went on to build up New Japan Pro Wrestling, while Giant Baba went to build up All Japan Pro Wrestling. So this was all about how Eric Bischoff, when he came to power in WCW, started a working agreement with New Japan Pro Wrestling, which brought guys like, Yushin Thunder Liger to WCW, Yuji Nagata, which you saw in AEW Dynamite last week, but he was a big guy in New Japan. And then there were a lot of guys who, wrestled in both promotions, like Scott Norton, who later became the IWGP champion. But as we found on this episode, started off doing arm wrestling. Like, what the fuck, over the top much? Anyway, basically, Inoki reached out to Bischoff, kind of get Muhammad Ali involved. So, Muhammad Ali starts a proud tradition followed up by Dennis Rodman of going to North Korea. And they go to North Korea for this giant festival that drew 200,000 people over a couple of days. And a lot of this episode is kind of like, if you've watched like the Vice guide to North Korea, you get the gist. They always put on a big show for propaganda's sake. But man, this was done really well. And the way they kind of structured it is kind of like funny, It's like, oh man, like Hulk Hogan totally don't want to be involved in this. Let's get Ric Flair, and Ric Flair, he goes to Japan, wrestles Inoki in the main event, one of the biggest matches in wrestling history, if not the biggest match in wrestling history, just in terms of crowd size alone. But the way that the director, Jason Eisner, who directed one of my favorite kind of cult movies called Hobo with a Shotgun, shoots this is by largely dwelling on a couple of side storylines. One is like Scott Norton, who this big burly pro arm wrestler who signs up to wrestle in North Korea without knowing any of the geopolitics involved. He keeps why won't they let me do anything? I'm so bored. I'm gonna fight people. They won't let me play pool. And how he's like 1 minute away from punching one of these North Korean guys, they can put a bullet in his head at any given moment. And the way they follow this throughout, like he calls his wife and shit talks North Korea, and he doesn't realize they're tapping his phone. It's just amazing. But the other storyline in this is just fucking bonkers batshit. It largely follows Too Cold Scorpio. If you follow WWF in the 90s, you know him as Flash Funk. Or if you watched ECW or WCW, you know Flash Funk, or as Too Cold Scorpio, really good technician who had tons of good matches with Benoit in ECW. And it turns out he had one here in this Peace Festival too, where Hawk from the Legion of Doom and the Road Warriors keeps like getting on his case. So somewhere in between this stay in North Korea, he plans to murder Hawk with shivs made out of chopsticks. It's fucking bonkers. And Chris Benoit, of all people, has to talk him out of killing Road Warrior Hawk in North Korea. Ironic, given that Chris Benoit later became a serial killer or a mass murderer in his own private life. But dude, what the fuck? You need to watch this episode. It's amazing. I was really into the score for this episode. Just they used a theremin through the whole thing, so it has a very Twilight Zone Mars Attacks feel. They're in front of hundreds of thousands of people who don't understand wrestling. They're just watching in abject silence. It's just watch it. I'm sure it'll probably pop up on YouTube, since Vice tends to put up a lot of these episodes on YouTube. If not, eventually it'll be on Hulu. Or if you have Vice, check it out on the Vice app, or it'll, you're on demand if you have DirecTV. I highly recommend this episode. It's a ton of fun, very, very out there, and it kind of gives you a whole bird's eye view and then just how batshit the idea of pro wrestling is, especially when you combine it with a country that also kayfabes how awesome they are, even though they're kind of like an indie promotion in the world of countries. I'm just saying, it's kind of rad. Just check it out up on Vice. It's called Collision in Korea. Well, lots of cool talking heads in this episode. Sonny Ono, Eric Bischoff, Norton, Scorpio. But yeah, it's a cool episode, and just the recreations in this are really good. So yeah, my review, thumbs up. Very book report this review, but damn, I just had to share it. Any episode that involves people getting shivved potentially by chopsticks, and people saying, well, he was sick because he had hep C, else he would have killed that guy. I'm like, oh, all right then, I'm interested. So weird. All right, check it out. More fun reviews on the way from Cult Classics, Cult Following. Till then, see you later. Bye, guys.